Before we get into the video, we should pay respects to a pioneer legend of animation, specifically stop motion. During the 20th century, Ray Harryhausen. If you don't know who he is, well, what I have to say is...
You uncultured swine!
No, I'm just kidding with you guys. It is totally okay if you don't. If you're at least familiar with the original Clash of the Titans in 1981, or the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad in 1958, then those are some of the films he worked on. Harryhausen's craftsmanship is just out of this world. His creative imagination, yet realism, is what made fantasy into a reality. The movements and expressions of these creatures are so believable that you question whether they actually do exist or not. And that's the beauty of practical effects. But we won't get into an argument with that versus CGI because that's a whole other story. Now, without further ado, let the review begin. A little background to my first introduction of Ray Harryhausen. It all started when I was 6 or 7 years old. I was in the dollar store with my family. As I randomly looked around, I stumbled upon the DVD section, and there it was, a DVD case labeled Fairy Tale Favorites. Examining the back cover with what's included, I became intrigued, therefore decided to get it. It had Harryhausen's fairy tale shorts, Mother Goose stories, the story of Little Red Riding Hood, the story of Hansel and Gretel, and the story of Rapunzel. These short films are what led me to listening and reading the original fairy tales by Grimm, Anderson, Perrault, etc. The ones that weren't on the DVD, the story of King Midas, and the story of the tortoise and the hare, I'll be reviewing as well for part 2. Mother Goose and her goose pet peeped out of their storybook, and she used a movie projector to show the audience some of her stories. Little Miss Muffet, a little girl, just eating, minding her own business, until a spider came down and scared the absolute shit out of her.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Oh, hell no!
Old Mother Hubbard, an elderly woman with her dog who apparently loved to play tricks with his owner, all because he had no bones left. Guess the dog was that bored to get old Mother Hubbard's attention. The Queen of Hearts, a queen who made tarts, and the Knave of Hearts, like a sneaky bastard, tried to steal them, but was caught red-handed by the King of Hearts, who was like, "Are we gonna have a problem or what? Square up, my guy."
Put 'em up! Put 'em up!
And Humpty Dumpty, a curious egg that got dashed into pieces after sitting on a brick wall. The king's men failed an attempt by getting Humpty Dumpty back in shape. And as we cut back to Mother Goose and her goose pet, they wrapped it up and went back into their book. One thing I noticed, a hidden Easter egg, is this castle behind Humpty Dumpty. It's literally the same one as Rapunzel's prince's castle. It could possibly be a theory the king is Rapunzel's prince's dad before the prince found Rapunzel's tower. One day, Little Red Riding Hood, as the little girl was called for wearing a red cape and hood everywhere she went, was instructed by her mother to not stray off her grandmother's path while carrying a case of cookies to her. While Red Riding Hood was strolling through the wood, she saw a colorful field of flowers. Despite of what the mother warned her about, Red Riding Hood thought, one little thing wouldn't hurt, right? And as she plucked a few, a wolf came up to her. Not sus at all, if you ask me. After asking friendly questions in which she answered innocently, he finally asked where her grandmother lived. Red Riding Hood, with no suspicion, answered the wolf's question, and he bid her farewell, while simply walking away. Finding the grandmother in bed, and before the wolf could eat his course, she ran out to seek help, leaving behind her shawl and cap. This gave him an opportunity to disguise himself as the grandmother. When Red Riding Hood finally arrived at the house, she felt uneasy, for the sunlight made her supposed grandmother appear very dark and her voice sounding gruffly, assuming becoming ill. Naive Red Riding Hood pointed out the obvious features of the wolf until she mentioned his teeth, making him to finally eat her up all along. But before he could, the true grandmother returned with a huntsman who shot the wolf, and everyone lived in peace and harmony. A while after I first watched it, the only other version I knew at the time was by the Brothers Grimm. I listened to it on DVD, and it mistakenly labeled Charles Perrault for the author, who wrote this particular version. As I gotten older, I searched up which I assumed was by Perrault and realized I've been betrayed, for he gave the grandmother and our red-hooded heroine a demise. Then I found the version I was looking for, where the Grimm Brothers added the huntsman character and gave Red Riding Hood, along with the grandmother, the happy ending they deserve. Thank God. It's titled Little Red Cap. A poor woodcutter lived with his two children, Hansel and Gretel, who, despite being short on food, were happy and kept themselves busy by cleaning the house every day. As Gretel made sure the window was clean as a whistle, she accidentally spilled a pitcher of milk. Hansel, seeing his father in despair, decided to help him by venturing out into the woods with Gretel to fill a basket full of berries. Hansel used bread to leave a trail of crumbs so the children could find their way back home. Unknowingly, a bird was behind them, eating the breadcrumbs. Hansel and Gretel were now lost. But little did they know, a witch saw them and sets up a gingerbread house intentionally. When Hansel caught sight of it, the children began to eat it. Then the witch caught them eating, yet acted friendly to lure them inside for her wicked plan. And as Hansel started eating of what's on the table, the witch seized him and locked him up. He would soon be baked into a gingerbread boy. The witch ordered Gretel to see if the oven is hot enough, but Gretel played dumb, saying she didn't know how to. Angry and impatient, the witch did it herself. And without hesitation, Gretel shoved her inside the oven, then immediately bolted the door. Now the children are free. Suddenly, a white rabbit appeared, explaining how the forest animals feared of being near the witch. So since she's gone, the rabbit showed Hansel and Gretel where the witch kept her hidden treasure. Meanwhile, their father tried to look for his children, and finally found them safe and sound. And they lived happily, never going hungry again. FYI to whoever wrote this short film, the witch was clearly not green. As you can tell, she's obviously blue. And can we just talk about this food on the table? Delicious. When I first heard the Brothers Grimm tale on the same DVDs, full of most of the original stories we're familiar with, I found out Hansel and Gretel had a wicked stepmother in that version, who wanted to get rid of the children for good. That's just cruel, man. And the reason Hansel dropped breadcrumbs was because the parents, honestly the stepmother, made the children walk further and further until they abandoned them. Pretty effed up. Also, the witches, who's a separate character, real motivation was to cook and eat children whenever they passed by her house. Morbid, right? At least it's still a happy ending, except for the stepmother being dead. Say what? A young maiden with long golden hair named Rapunzel was locked up in an only one-window tower by a witch. All because Rapunzel's parents stole the witch's radishes. Now this happened every day for several years. The witch came to the tower, making sure the coast was clear, and called out to Rapunzel to let down her hair. So she did, and the witch casted a spell by transforming the hair into braids, the easier way for her to climb. The witch then settled down inside, and would just watch Rapunzel for a few hours. But one day, a prince was strolling around, and discovered the tower coincidentally. While he tried to find a way in, the witch came back, forcing the prince to hide. He finally figured out how to enter the tower based on witnessing the witch's daily routine. The prince waited for the witch to leave so that he could get in after her. As the witch was gone, he, imitating her voice, called out to Rapunzel to let her hair down. This caused Rapunzel to lower her braids, and when the prince climbed up, she was scared shitless, for Rapunzel did not expect a man ever in her isolated life. But seeing the prince being kind and respectful, her fear went away. And obviously, as fairy tales go, they fall in love in an instant. The next day, the witch returned. Rapunzel's mind became non-existent at this point by accidentally revealing the prince. This made the witch go completely apeshit on her ass. She took a pair of scissors and cuts off Rapunzel's braids. At the same time, the prince arrived, as promised, to free Rapunzel and called out to her. And what did he find after climbing up? Not his dear beloved, but the old, decrepit witch. With a quick blow, the hag enchanted the prince to become blind forever, leaving him lost, wandering in deep sorrow. And what better way to punish your child for disobeying you might ask? Leave them all alone in a desert. Yeah, good parenting there, witch. Though, to be fair, she was trying to protect her, yet, frankly, overbearing much? Anywho, months had passed since Rapunzel lived in the desert, by herself, basically starved to death. Jesus. And as luck would have it, the blinded prince at last found her.
At last.
Seeing him blind, Rapunzel wept, and her tears fell onto his eyes. They broke the witch's curse, and the prince's vision was restored, as well as Rapunzel's hair growing back out of nowhere. Only in fairy tales. So this leaves the prince taking Rapunzel to his kingdom, where they got married and lived happily ever after. Rapunzel was a tale I've known for a long time, even before Disney started working on Tangled. And surprisingly, this adaptation is on board with the original Grimm storyline. Of course, there are some things that hadn't been fully explained, and what has been changed or removed. Like the last two I covered, after first watching these, I listened to the original text. For example, the brothers gave an explanation as to why Rapunzel's parents stole from the neighboring witch's garden. 2 words: pregnancy cravings. Really, woman? Out of all the things you craved for a forbidden vegetable from a powerful enchantress? The love language between Rapunzel and the prince was more than just a While it borrowed the same reason the witch banishing Rapunzel, there's actually an earlier version where Rapunzel's tight-fitting waistband was what gave her prince secret away. Yeah. And lastly, Rapunzel gave birth to twins, boy and girl. I think we're done here. Thank you guys for being on this journey with me, if you have been watching the whole way through. This platform helps me to share the world my interests, such as art, fairy tales, and animation. It really means a lot to have the support I could get from other people, whether it's friends, family, you guys watching. Overall, I truly appreciate it. For the upcoming video, I'll be reviewing the story of King Midas and the story of the tortoise and the hare. Until then, adios.
Hansel and Gretel did not see the ugly green witch.